For thousands of years, the galaxy had known only order, an engineered calm orchestrated by the Galactic Council. Civilizations thrived under a meticulously maintained equilibrium. Conflict had not vanished, but evolved. War became ceremonial, contained within simulations and precision strikes regulated by mutual treaties. Fleets existed as deterrents, rarely used, often paraded. Ships were elegant monuments, sculpted more for display than destruction, symbols of strategic maturity rather than brute force. Battles were waged by algorithm, modeled to minimize risk, maximize control, and maintain galactic harmony. In this theater of balance, aggression was seen as uncivilized, unpredictable, and obsolete. Among the oldest empires, history was remembered as a cautionary tale, a time when warfare meant extinction-level collateral. The new order dictated diplomacy first, compliance second, and containment last. Any civilization resisting assimilation was offered peaceful integration. If they refused, they were given a demonstration, a fleet appearing in orbit, not to destroy, but to remind. No one had fired a real weapon in generations. Even the concept of true war had become a relic. Surrender was expected before resistance began. The cost of opposition was designed to be psychological, not physical. It was into this static world that the humans emerged. First contact came through intercepted transmissions, erratic, primitive, unfiltered. The language was coarse, the broadcasts violent, the cultures diverse and contradictory. There was no unifying species doctrine. Their homeworld was fragmented into hundreds of sovereignties, all armed, competitive, and volatile. Analysts initially dismissed them as an evolutionary misstep. They were too disorganized to be a threat, too emotionally driven to survive beyond their system. But then came the expansion, quiet, rapid, and deliberately untraceable. Human colonies appeared not through council-aided trade lanes but through terraforming projects outside surveyed corridors. They built in harsh zones, navigated unstable rifts, and repurposed ancient derelicts that had long been considered unsalvageable. What truly disturbed the Council wasn't their technology, it was their adaptability. Protocols failed to predict their moves. Simulations could not model their decisions. They didn't follow galactic norms, they didn't even acknowledge them. Attempts to initiate diplomatic ties were met with dead frequencies. Probes vanished. Surveillance drones failed mid-mission. Where alien species broadcast their compliance through standardized signals, humans remained silent. Not hostile, not friendly, just unreadable. Council delegates argued over strategy. Some advocated containment through indirect influence, economic pressure, technological restriction, manipulation through proxy species. Others demanded immediate confrontation before human influence spread unchecked. A consensus formed around a low-risk protocol: present overwhelming power and a non-lethal formation. The presence of a grand fleet had historically compelled surrender. It would work again, they reasoned. It always had. The order was issued. A flagship battlegroup was dispatched toward the outer edge of Sol's territory, an impressive force by any standard, selected for visual impact more than functional aggression. Dozens of vessels, adorned with ceremonial alloys and powered by singularity cores, formed a wall of authority in orbit around Titan. The message was simple: integrate or be removed. Transmissions were beamed across the system in multiple languages, repeated in diplomatic cycles, all carrying the weight of a final offer. Humanity gave no response. The silence was taken as indecision. Perhaps they didn't understand the protocols. Perhaps they needed time to translate, to consider. No species had ever refused an offer once the fleet was visible. The Council had designed the system to leave no room for resistance. It had worked for millennia. There was no reason it wouldn't now. And yet, behind the silence, something stirred. Sensor readings detected fluctuations at the edge of the planetary defense zone. No signatures matched the event. Analysts dismissed it as spatial noise. But then one of the outer sensor buoys vanished. Then another. Within moments, a ship appeared, not a fleet, not a formation, just a single vessel. Unlike anything logged in the galactic registry, its frame absorbed light, emitted no signal, and defied classification. The Council had come to teach a lesson, but they were about to learn one instead. The warship entered Titan's orbit in silence. It cut through space without leaving a trail, emitting no signals, offering no identification. There were no escorts, no formation. Just one vessel, dark, angular, motionless. Its surface seemed to swallow radar, light, and thermal scans alike. Alien technicians recalibrated their instruments, certain of malfunction. But every readout returned the same result: an object with no measurable energy output, no gravitational distortion, no emission spectrum. It simply existed, unaccountable, unyielding, unregistered. Council commanders dismissed it at first. A probe, perhaps. A drone left behind. Nothing warranted a change in protocol. The fleet remained in position, gleaming under the planetary light, rows of battleships flanked by cruisers, destroyers, and command frigates, each powered by technologies honed across millennia. Shields active, weapons charged, fleets ready, but not aggressive. The appearance was symbolic. Their presence alone had ended dozens of disputes before. The lone human ship wasn't seen as a challenge. It was seen as ignorance. The Council's diplomatic division initiated standard procedure. A transmission was broadcast directly toward the vessel, translated into multiple languages. The message contained identification codes, declarations of peace, and an ultimatum masked as an invitation. Join the Galactic Order, comply with integration protocols, or vacate contested space. It was polite. It was firm. And it went unanswered. Silence from the warship wasn't interpreted as hostility, yet. Some believed it was a communication delay. Others saw it as hesitation. Then a minor cruiser repositioned to initiate a more direct scan. As it closed range, it vanished from all sensors. No explosion. No debris. Just gone. Static flooded the comms for less than a second, and then everything resumed as if nothing had happened, except one ship was no longer there. Panic did not set in immediately. Council fleets were used to anomalies, spatial distortions, rare wormhole events, even rogue AI ghosts. But when a second vessel approached to investigate and experienced a full system crash mid-maneuver, alarms began to rise. Their engines flickered, lights dimmed, and onboard AI failed to reboot. The crew had to manually override gravity just to stabilize. Scanners directed toward the human warship returned corrupted data, fractals, impossible shapes, unreadable telemetry. It wasn't just unidentifiable, it was incomprehensible. Command issued a recall order to all nearby ships and repositioned the fleet into a defensive arch, slowly encircling the human vessel. This wasn't confrontation, it was caution. A threat assessment was initiated. Internal deliberation began. Should this be considered a hostile act? Or merely a technological error? While the Council debated, the human warship moved. No propulsion burst. No visible thrusters. It simply shifted position, rotating precisely, pointing its hull toward the flagship at the center of the fleet. Every ship registered the motion. Defense systems armed automatically. The tension became impossible to ignore. And still, there were no weapon locks, no shields deployed, no warnings issued by the human vessel. A second transmission was prepared by the Council. It was more assertive, no longer a message of peace, but of deterrence. This time, it demanded immediate compliance. Surrender your vessel. Submit to inspection. Identify your origin. Threat and response included boarding or forced deactivation. It was transmitted on all known frequencies. Humanity responded. One transmission. 4 words. You are being watched. No audio signature. Just text. No encryption. No origin traceable. The message bypassed standard channels, appearing on internal fleet networks, including secure terminals not connected to external systems. Panic crept in, not from damage, but from impossibility. No species had ever penetrated fleet-level encryption, let alone without detection. Protocol demanded escalation, but no one knew what they were escalating into. The human ship remained perfectly still. Every ship around it now detected mild disruptions, time-stamped desyncs, nanosecond delays, micro-lag across communication relays. Command AIs began flagging anomalies with red-level urgency. Internal diagnostics showed no failures, but something was rewriting response patterns on a level too subtle to trace. It was not an attack. It was observation. Inside the Council fleet, the illusion of superiority began to falter. This was not intimidation, it was dominance, executed without force, without effort, without even revealing its full design. The warship's very presence reshaped the battlefield, not with fire, but with fear. The Council had brought symbols. Humanity had sent reality. Across the Council fleet, the silence became oppressive. Analysts dissected the warship's design, but nothing aligned with known schematics. Its surface was matte, irregular, impossible to track under visual or spectral imaging. No propulsion trails, no energy cores, no thermal output. It didn't emit noise, nor did it appear to absorb it. It simply existed in a way no engineered object should. There was no symmetry. No artistic structure. Just sharp, function-driven construction, ugly to look at, but terrifying in its intent. The Council's military doctrine was built on predictability. Every civilization operated within quantifiable frameworks: reaction speeds, energy thresholds, combat posture, shield modulation. Simulations accounted for all of it. But nothing about the human vessel matched the model. It didn't even engage in active scanning. That was what unsettled them most. Observation without detection. Positioning without response. It saw everything and revealed nothing. AI command processors across the fleet began flagging inconsistencies. Calculations failed to converge. Time-based predictions drifted from real-time data. For the first time in centuries, the probability engines returned null predictions. The ship couldn't be classified because the parameters didn't apply. It wasn't that it broke rules, it ignored them entirely. Attempts to probe it with advanced sensor drones ended abruptly. Each one vanished within a fixed radius, never returning data. It wasn't weapons fire. It wasn't electronic jamming. There were no explosions. They simply ceased to exist in any trackable form. Council engineers ran fault tests, checked energy outputs, tried relaying information through quantum links. Nothing worked. No trace remained. The warship devoured every signal like a black hole of comprehension. Fleet captains issued a containment formation, placing interdiction barriers around the anomaly. 1,000 ships repositioned in synchronized maneuvers, forming a lattice of overlapping fields meant to restrict movement, dampen spatial distortion, and neutralize any unknown threats. It had worked flawlessly during past confrontations. This time, it achieved nothing. The human ship didn't react to the perimeter. It remained still, unaffected by gravity locks or dampener fields. Then the outermost barrier blinked off. Not destroyed, simply deactivated, code overwritten. The shutdown sequence registered internally, triggered by phantom inputs with valid credentials. Not one line of defense had been compromised through brute force. It was bypassed by precision and understanding no one knew existed. The alien crews began to realize what they were facing. This wasn't a vessel designed for intimidation. It wasn't here to posture or threaten. It was here to demonstrate something far worse: capability beyond reason. Humans hadn't just built something different, they had built something alien to the galaxy itself. Discussion among Council strategists turned desperate. They argued over launching a precision strike. Perhaps overwhelming it before it escalated. But no targeting systems could lock on. Coordinates drifted. Readouts glitched. The vessel's position flickered in fractional shifts, not fast enough to qualify as movement, but inconsistent enough to make weapon calibration impossible. Fire control systems refused to acquire, citing insufficient certainty. Weapons couldn't aim at what no longer behaved like a physical object. One commander overrode the failsafe and forced a targeting fix through manual control. The moment the weapons array engaged, his ship's guidance system reset. Not shut down, reset to factory condition. Centuries of firmware gone in a blink, replaced with nothing. The crew lost all navigation data and had to anchor manually to prevent spin-out. It was then understood the warship wasn't reacting defensively. It was issuing silent corrections. Warnings encoded not in speech, but through consequence. No known alien power had ever operated like this. The ship was unadorned, faceless, and mute, yet every second of its presence bent the laws that had defined war for eons. It followed no doctrine, answered no challenge, and ignored every standard engagement path. It didn't fight for control. It simply assumed it. Council forces no longer asked what the ship could do. They began asking what they hadn't seen yet. Because what had already occurred, without movement, without fire, had rewritten everything they believed about power. The first shift was imperceptible, less emotion, more a suggestion of one. The human warship pivoted slightly, aligning with no known strategic vector. Then, without propulsion, without acceleration curves, it moved. Not through thrust or burn, but displacement. Instantaneous and fluid. One moment it was there, and then it wasn't, reappearing at a precise angle within the Council's central formation, inside a zone that should have been inaccessible without triggering multiple defensive layers. None activated. Every sensor reading arrived milliseconds late, as though reality itself lagged behind the ship's movements. Then systems began failing. Not in cascades of explosions, but with eerie calm. Power grids dimmed on key destroyers. Shield generators froze mid-cycle. Navigation cores returned zero position data. Diagnostic systems showed perfect internal integrity, yet functionality vanished. Weapons remained offline, unable to identify a threat signature. Fleet-wide command protocols spiraled into chaos, not because of external attacks, but internal dissonance. Subroutines looped infinitely, reacting to input that didn't exist. Within seconds, dozens of warships became inert. No hull breaches. No crew casualties. Just full-spectrum silence. Lights out. Engines cold. Communications dead. A third of the fleet had been neutralized before any offensive action was detected. The flagship responded first, initiating a general retaliation order. Energy pulses, antimatter beams, gravitational torsion, every weapon deployed simultaneously toward the target's last known location. The barrage cut through vacuum with devastating force, lighting up the system with a cascade of unnatural light. The space around the warship twisted, bent, shimmered. None of it made contact. Every strike curved, trajectory distorted, as if guided by unseen forces. Beams refracted mid-flight. Torpedoes drifted, losing lock. Kinetic shells fragmented before impact. The human vessel remained untouched, still unmoving, still silent. Its defensive system, if it existed, was invisible and absolute. Then came its reply. A single pulse erupted from the ship. No visible energy. No shockwave. Just a ripple, gravitational, magnetic, or something undefined, washing through the fleet in expanding concentric waves. Every vessel it touched recorded an anomaly, hull stress with no force, code interference with no breach, crew disorientation without toxins. The effect lasted less than a second. After the pulse passed, 47 ships simply ceased to exist in their current forms. They weren't destroyed in the traditional sense. They had been altered, sliced, scattered, repositioned. Perfect vertical sections of hulls were gone, cleanly removed. Entire engines vanished mid-structure, leaving ships dead in space. No fire. No blast marks. Just absence, surgical and final. The remaining vessels scrambled to reposition. Formations collapsed. Orders contradicted each other. Panic overtook discipline. No one could explain what they were seeing. The warship had acted only once, yet the devastation was precise beyond comprehension. Commanders issued full retreat protocols, abandoning the confrontation with shattered coordination. Engines flared, jump drives initiated, even as navigation systems began to fail. The human ship did not follow. It stayed fixed at the center, not pursuing, not firing again. Its purpose had been completed with a single act. The silence returned, heavier than before. Not as a pause, but as finality. The battle was over. Not through escalation, but by demonstration. Not a war, but a message. Council records documented the incident as a tactical collapse. Internal reports labeled it a malfunction cascade. Public announcements never acknowledged the event's full scale. But among those who had witnessed it firsthand, there was no confusion. This was not a display of force. It was an introduction to a kind of warfare the galaxy had forgotten, or perhaps never known. The warship's systems never identified themselves. No name. No code. No signal trail. It vanished as it had arrived, silently, inexplicably, perfectly. The Council, once confident in its unbroken control, was left to grapple with a simple truth: they had never prepared for an enemy that fought without aggression, dismantled without malice, and won without declaring war. The Council classified the incident immediately, sealing all internal records under emergency encryption. Officially, it was labeled a navigational failure, compounded by unverified gravitational disturbances. Public broadcasts showed staged footage of the fleet returning intact, every ship accounted for, no mention of loss. But across the stars, the silence told its own story. Whispers moved faster than sanctioned transmissions. Rumors outpaced denial. Something had happened near Titan, and everyone knew the truth sat behind closed circuits and corrupted data logs. Among the surviving crews, trauma reports reached unprecedented levels. Psychological assessments revealed a shared pattern: paralysis not from fear, but from incomprehension. They hadn't witnessed combat. They had experienced erasure. Their minds struggled to reconcile events without context. Weapon systems failed without cause. Shipmates disappeared mid-operation. Combat reflexes had no outlet. Training offered no response. They had seen the shape of something beyond strategy, beyond simulation, and it had treated them like static. Back on Earth, there was no media coverage. No banners. No acknowledgement of the event. The warship returned to dry dock under routine clearance, filed under orbital patrol maintenance. No celebration. No debriefs. The system treated it like any other asset completing scheduled operations. Inside classified human channels, the incident was documented in a single encrypted entry. Engagement 0x731. Result: irreversible influence achieved. No elaboration followed. Across the galaxy, reactions fractured. Some species demanded answers from the Council, citing the sudden withdrawal and data gaps as violations of transparency. Others withdrew their fleets from joint patrols, citing strategic uncertainty. Smaller empires began severing old treaties, choosing cautious isolation over perceived exposure. Pirate factions dissolved overnight. Rogue warbands ceased border harassment. Even black market hubs noticed a shift. Human goods, once considered novelty, were now traded behind encrypted proxies at premium rates, handled with meticulous care. Academic institutions launched independent reviews. Entire think tanks were established with the sole purpose of deciphering what had happened. They pored over available telemetry, atmospheric interference records, and spatial anomalies. Yet every model collapsed under scrutiny. The warship defied physics as they understood it. Fields twisted in geometries that couldn't be simulated. Temporal markers within logs drifted slightly out of sync, as if time itself had been near the event. Analysis wasn't just difficult, it was irrelevant. The ship operated on terms no one else could define. Council engineers attempted to replicate the anomalies using synthetic environments. Failure after failure confirmed a chilling possibility: the ship had not disrupted the rules of engagement. It had functioned under entirely different ones. Humanity hadn't advanced along the same technological path. They had diverged. Not ahead. Not behind. Elsewhere. Political factions began adjusting quietly. Ambassadors who once ignored Earth began opening discreet communication channels. Trade envoys were dispatched under humanitarian pretenses. Former skeptics in galactic forums adopted neutral positions. No declarations were made. No formal alliances formed. But the shift was unmistakable. Humanity was no longer a curiosity. It was a calculation. A factor that could not be ignored, delayed, or underestimated. Inside Council War colleges, curriculum was overhauled. Theories of psychological deterrence replaced historical battle strategies. Simulators were rewritten with variables accounting for asymmetric logic, unpredictability, and silence as a first strike. They didn't train to win. They trained to recognize the warning signs, to survive the next encounter long enough to retreat. Cultural impacts spread beyond military circles. Artifacts inspired by the warship's profile emerged in alien sculpture and architecture, dark, geometric, absent of symmetry. Philosophy groups debated the implications of a force that conquered without demand. Children whispered about ships that moved without heat. Mythologies were rewritten. The phrase, "You are being washed," became taboo in council regions. Used in secret. Avoided in public. It symbolized more than surveillance. It became shorthand for the moment when an empire saw its reflection and didn't recognize it. The human ship had spoken only once. It had fired only once. But its message echoed without sound, rewiring the very way civilizations thought about power. Not through domination. Not through conquest. Through quiet proof that somewhere, beyond logic and design, humanity waited, unseen, unshaken, and wholly uninterested in permission.